This next proposal would seek to adjust how we think about the declaration of intent and how it is used in awarding a conference an automatic qualification berth to national championships, also called AQs. So right now, we say that every institution must submit its declaration of intent by June 1 for the upcoming academic year and tell us which sports you are competing in and which ones you intend to participate in postseason if you're given that opportunity. There is right now in our bylaws a handful of exceptions that would say even if an institution undeclares or changes that declaration of intent or for some reason is not permitted to participate in postseason, that institution still gets to count towards the conference's total for determining if the conference gets one of these AQs or automatic qualifications. Now, typically that number is 6. That's the magic number for a conference. It's looking to have 6 schools competing with the declared intent to participate in postseason in any given sport, and if the conference has 6, it gets an AQ. This proposal would seek to limit somewhat the situations in which the conference still gets to keep its AQ even if it drops below 6 member institutions competing in that sport. So for example, right now in the legislation, there is an exception that says if a school undeclares during the middle of a season, the conference would still get to keep the AQ, the thought process being that the conference doesn't really have notice of this change, and in fairness to the rest of the members of the conference would keep the AQ. This proposal would seek to eliminate that exception and otherwise say the conference must have 6 teams truly complete the season and satisfy their declaration of intent to keep the AQ. So I'll also make sure that we are all tracking on what it means to satisfy a declaration of intent. That means that the school stays declared with an intent to participate in postseason all the way through the end of the season. It also means for any sports that would have a minimum number of games that you'd have to compete in to be eligible for postseason, that minimum number has to be met for that school to be deemed as satisfying its declaration of intent. And we know that there's a couple of sports where there's also regulations that say, in cross country, for example, you have to have a certain number of runners actually complete, not just start, but complete the conference cross country meet for that team to be deemed as successfully satisfying its declaration of intent. So in all of those sorts of examples, that would count towards this conversation and this proposal about what it means to actually satisfy a declaration of intent for a given school, and then a conference would have to have 6 schools complete their declaration of intent and satisfy it in order for that conference to keep its AQ. There was a legislative proposal that was approved by NAIA membership this past year in 2023 that preserved some ability for the conference to keep an AQ if it went from 6 schools and an AQ in 1 year, and then the following year it dropped down to 5 schools. So a grace period to be granted towards that conference if for whatever reason it dropped from 6 schools sponsoring a given sport to 5 schools, and a 2-year grace period to keep that AQ. Under this proposal, that is still essentially preserved. So a conference that drops between 2 different academic years drops from 6 schools and a granted AQ to dropping to 5 schools the following year, that grace period is still preserved under this proposal. So it's largely those mid-season changes, like a school undeclaring, that this proposal would seek to eliminate from the calculation of whether a conference gets to keep its AQ.